Now, a word from our sponsor, MedBridge Healthcare. MedBridge Healthcare is a leading provider of sleep lab management services and home sleep apnea testing. MedBridge partners with hospitals, healthcare systems, and medical academic institutions to offer comprehensive, fully integrated services for sleep disorders.
Lights
Well,
out.
welcome everyone once again to another episode of Sleep Tech Talk, the sleep podcast with your hosts and friends, Emerson Kerr, Robert Miller, and me, Dr. Gerald George Mannikarote. Folks, we have a different kind of show today. You've seen us do a round robin or round table or panel discussion, whatever you want to call it, once in a while. And today is one of those days. But before we get started, just want to give a huge shout out to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for all the likes, all the comments, all the shares. We can't thank you enough for all that. All subscriptions. We see the numbers keep going up and up and up, and we really, really sincerely appreciate it. We can't do this without you, and we do this for you. Continue to share the podcast with all the sleep professionals out there and just anybody who's curious about sleep. Huge shout out to our sponsors once again as well, because without them, we can't do this. With that, on to the show. So, gentlemen, what are we talking about today?
It's a smorgasbord of topics. We're trying to catch up with each other on the happenings in sleep medicine, I think.
Wow. Okay. All right. So let's go to topic number one then. Smorgasbord.
The big word.
Yes, I know. I can barely pronounce it, but yeah. So what's the first topic today? I have an idea. I think it's something that you would do if you keep eating smorgasbords
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think we're gonna talk a little bit about some of the results that we've seen recently from Eli Lilly's Surmount OSA study. That is the study of patients who are taking medications for weight loss, and what that looks like for those patients after they've been on the medication for a period of a year.
You
Um,
know, it's that's interesting. You're saying that because there's been a lot of talk for years about the sleep apnea medication, and this is what you're talking about, right, Robert?
it's not actually. So there's another company that has a respiratory medication that is in development currently. That's Apnimed, and um, based on their current timeline right now, it looks like Apnimed is set to enter the market sometime in 2025. They're in the process of going through phase 3 clinical trials with the medication that's the furthest along in developments right now, and then they do have fast track approval already in place with the FDA, so that once they complete their phase 3 trials, it just means that an expedited to market treatment solution for that Apnimed medication.
So just to be clear, this is different in terms of the pharmacological action is different from the big buzzword these days is GLP-1, right?
Yes. It is very different. And I would have to go back and look at it. It's been a little bit since I've looked at their information about the medication, but it's essentially two sort of historic respiratory drugs that have been in the market for years and years, and this is they've sort of found the right combination and I guess balance of each one of those medications that will help to improve patients' sleep apnea when they take the medication. So it is a nightly pill that the patient takes, and there is the clinical trial information they've released so far has shown about a 50% reduction or so in AHI, but it's a very small patient uh, sample set in the early stage clinical trials. Phase 3 will be the larger patient population, so we'll get a sense of what it's going to look like when it's applied to a larger group. Um, and I don't know yet whether their phase 3 clinical trial is showing it. It's sort of like this GLP-1 study where there's a patient population just on the medication and another that's on the medication and CPAP therapy. So I think we'll have to stay tuned to see what that looks like.
Let's take a step back and go talk about once again the Eli Lilly study because that came out mid-April, this year, and that created a lot of buzz, especially after all the Ozempic talks and Man, even Oprah did a special on national TV a few months ago, and it was so big that you had somebody like that take out a portion of time on TV to just to talk about it. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the thing that's interesting is that, as we look at the people who are candidates for this medication, the most frustrating part for me, and this is a little bit aside of your question, is so many people that could benefit from it have to be chronic before they can actually qualify for it. And I think that's probably the single most frustrating thing is for those who are struggling to lose weight, they've done the carnivore diet, they're exercising, they do everything they can, but just the system is no longer working. You hit 40, you hit 50, and it's like the thermostat broke. Whatever's regulating you is not working right anymore. And so I think what the promise of these medications is that it can open up the system and make you lose weight, obviously. The problem is it's just like with CPAP in women around that with somebody who has all the signs and symptoms of sleep apnea. They've basically got to be at that place of needing CPAP before they can get therapy. The same problem occurs with this medication. You've got to be a diabetic. You've got to already have a chronic condition for there to be something, for the payer to even step up and support you. Thankfully, there's organizations that are providing, some easy path to that. But I think for me, that's been one of the frustrating topics I've run into is the patients that just don't have access because they've got to be chronic before they can get treated.
That's a very interesting point about the payers because I know a lot of people. I've heard that conversation in, anecdotally, of course, is that hey, I wanted to get on to Ozempic or what have you, but insurance won't cover it, and then I have to pay out of pocket, and a lot of people are having that trouble. But to hit to the point that you were talking about, Emerson, is the fact that this is not actually for OSA. This is for losing weight, correct?
That's right. But that's the question though, is that, because we do tie BMI and the adipose, build of a patient, their neck size, everything to sleep apnea. And the idea that weight loss could affect that is extraordinary. I mean, we even see it in some numbers from United Airlines. They anticipate an $80 million savings in their services because of weight loss. Lighter passengers are going to make for less, fuel consumption for the airplane. So there's no question that there's an impact. And we expect there to be an impact back in the sleep apnea direction simply because we certainly know that losing weight can have an impact on a better airway and airway collapse. So there are assumptions I believe we make. Is the science really there? I don't know that we really have that solid line between those two yet, but we certainly know that weight loss can improve sleep apnea.
We always knew that, right?
Right.
We
didn't have that question.
But going back to the economics of it, when Eli Lilly had released that study released that study, we saw there were changes in the market with CPAP manufacturers and DME companies that are in the public sector. They had taken an impact. Of course, the markets righted themselves. But what were your thoughts on that? Do you feel that this is going to continue to happen as there's more research that comes into play and that gets released in the market?
Well, I think you saw the impact, like you're saying, with ResMed. I mean, in this past fall, their stock dropped by 40%. Now we know they just rebounded, so congratulations to them. But there are those market fears that weight loss with these kind of medications could impact companies like ResMed and React and others who are looking at growth opportunities. Same thing for oral appliance therapy. Anybody in this space, Inspire, that's looking to manage sleep disordered breathing has to be cognizant of what these kinds of medications can do to affect their growth prospects going forward. Clearly, in ResMed's case, they rebounded and it didn't have quite the impact, at least not yet. And it could be because of the barriers that payers have put in front of GLP-1s that make it less accessible for the general population.
But I do think it's important for us to step back just a little bit to make sure we sort of categorize these GLP-1s a little bit more specifically. And what I mean is there are two different types of the medication. One is the semaglutide that everyone knows about. That's Ozempic. But I think what's important to understand is that Ozempic is not FDA approved for weight loss. It is FDA approved for diabetes. And although the term, for these medications and for people who experience the weight loss is that, it's Ozempic. Everything is Ozempic. But actually, the medication that is FDA approved is Wegovy, also by the same manufacturer. So you have Wegovy and Ozempic that are both manufactured by one manufacturer, Novo Nordisk, and then you have these tirzepatide medications that are actually more effective in promoting weight loss for patients. And that is Manjaro, which is FDA approved for diabetes. They've got two different forms of this medication also. Manjaro is FDA approved for diabetes, and the latest medication is called Zepbound, that is approved for weight loss, FDA approved for weight loss. So it's interesting that these pharmaceutical companies have different brands related to different conditions, but it's essentially the same medication that the patients are taking.
That's interesting, Robert. And with that being said, can you talk a little to the study that was released by Eli
Are you
Lilly?
a sleep tech looking for new opportunities? Well, MedBridge Healthcare is one of the largest employers of sleep technologists, and they are growing. If you are a sleep technologist interested in a new position, potential paid relocation, or looking for a career advancement, consider a career with MedBridge Healthcare. Now back to
For
the
the
show.
Surmount OSA study, the full study data has not all been published. We just got some of the highlights, but essentially there were two different patient groups that were included in the study. The first group was a group of patients who had diagnosed sleep apnea and were on the GLP-1 medication only for a period of 1 year. And those patients lost about 20% of their body weight, and their AHI was reduced by 55%. The second group was a group of patients, and by the way, this is a fairly large study. We're talking about 4,000 plus patients between the two different groups. The second group took the GLP-1 medication, but they also wore the CPAP therapy during the time that they were going through the weight loss, and I think the AHI was reduced down to like 62%. So yes, the findings were pretty similar between the patient groups. But Jerry, you and I talked about this earlier, that it is interesting that the results didn't necessarily take into account, the follow up for these patients was a diagnostic study. So it's essentially you took the medication, you're diagnosed with OSA, you took the medication, and then a year later you have another diagnostic study, and it reduced your HI by 55%. The second group, it would have been interesting to because they were adherent to CPAP therapy, they were also adherent to their GLP-1. What did those patients' AHI look like on the GLP-1 and with the CPAP therapy in the follow-up study? Because ResMed has in one of the latest actually it was their medical director who just had this statement where he talked about the fact that typically CPAP alone, regardless of weight loss, weight gain, whatever, typically reduces AHI by 86%. It's still the gold standard. When all is said and done, CPAP is still the gold standard for treating sleep apnea.
Well said, Robert, and thank you so much for the summary of that. I find
Sorry.
it hey, no, 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 that's no,
A lot.
but I think it's important that we understand that, and as sleep professionals, it's important to understand that as well as how does it impact that? Because as you were speaking, and I was tying into what Emerson had said about the cost impact or the socioeconomic side of it, when he spoke about the United Airlines situation, how they're expecting $80 million worth of savings. If you think about this impact, yes, CPAP is the gold standard, but you add the weight loss on top of it. How much would it affect the entire healthcare system if you're able to do that? Because we know that obstructive sleep apnea is directly linked to various disorders, cardiovascular, stroke, whatever. We all know those things. But you add weight loss on top of that. How many other secondary factors can we be helping to reduce if this actually works? Like you said, if we had the actual long-term follow-up studies to see what's going on.
Well, I think you have to take into account you have the two different types of medications and the two patient populations that they already treat: sleep apnea and diabetes. It's significant. It's a significant number of patients in the U.S. There's even some correlation to improvement in COPD for patients who take GLP-1s. So it is going to be a part of our new treatment world going forward. But I think the interesting thing, and I know that the big question mark is what is this going to do to the market? Well, think about Inspire. A few years ago, before Inspire really started to take off, and all of the advertising that Inspire has done, I absolutely 100% believe that Inspire has helped all ships to rise, and it's promoted sleep apnea and made sleep apnea awareness at a level that we've never seen before. Now, think about multiple pharmaceutical companies all moving into that space. We're going to see more awareness campaigns than we have ever seen in the history of our industry. And we haven't seen the number. It's still 80% of patients remain undiagnosed and untreated. So, um, I have to believe that with increased awareness, that we'll see more patients going through the diagnostic channel to get diagnosed with sleep apnea, and I also think that it's going to help long term. It's going to help CPAP adherence because these patients are going to be taking their GLP-1. They'll lose weight. They'll also be on their CPAP device, and the pressure may not need to be quite as high because now you've got a patient who needs less pressure to maintain their airway.
And I think there's another piece to this, and that's when you look at, there was something that came out by the FDA just this past March that said that using Wegovy injection reduced the risk of cardiovascular death, heart attack, and stroke in adults with cardiovascular disease and either obesity or overweight patients. And then you go on further to other studies, and you're looking at reduction in creating vasodilation, heart rate regulation, reduction of blood pressure. All of these things lead to even the next question, and that is, what other medications can a patient come off of? Because if we're having that sort of cardiovascular effect, weight loss effect, all of that, could it be that possibly many medications a patient is on could be either reduced or eliminated because of the controls that this type of medication creates in the system of a patient that has comorbidities? So I think it opens up a whole massive conversation of so many different ways the medication can help a patient, from cardiac to pulmonary to diabetes, to sleep apnea. All of them can be impacted by this kind of medication.
And I also sort of caution us as an industry that back at Sleep Trends, actually it was Sleep Disruptors that the ASM put on the last Sleep Disruptors course that was presented. One of the physicians there actually is part of the Eli Lilly study, and he talked about the fact that there is a non-adherence factor to the GLP-1 medications as well. In fact, he presented a study that showed within 2 years of initiating a GLP-1, about 70% of the patients in a 4,000 patient study population, 70% of the patients stopped taking the medication. It was either due to side effects of the medication, or it could be that they lost weight and decided to quit taking the medicine. Which we're as a society, we can certainly be non-adherent to a drug regimen.
I think that's a great place to stop. Hey, gentlemen, thank you so much for the input. I think it's been a very fun and lively discussion today. All right, folks, thank you once again for joining us on Sleep Tech Talk. And until next time, we say, lights on.
Before we go, we would like to thank our sponsor, MedBridge Healthcare. MedBridge Healthcare is developing innovative inpatient, post-discharge, and population health programs to screen comorbid conditions, diagnose and treat sleep disorders. Learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com. Once again, you can learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com.